Hey, folks, it's time for the quote of the day, and I need to warn everybody on this one. Just talking about this man may conjure some unpleasant images in your mind. If you know anything about him, this can be a little challenging for some folks. Now, I think it's important that we talk about him. It's his birthday today, and I want to make sure that people understand that it can be unsettling for some folks. And so I wanted to say that right up front. I don't believe that it should be because he was just a human, he was just a man. But for some people, what he went through is very, very difficult. Today is the birthday of a man named Joseph Merrick. Now, that may mean something to you. You may know that name. And if you do, then you know what I'm about to talk about. But if that name does not mean anything to you, then I'm going to give you his other name, the name that most people know him by, and that is the Elephant Man. Now, I know that there are people out there, younger folks today, that don't even know who that is. They have no reference to that. It's not a big deal to them. For us older folks, we remember a movie that came out in 1980 that detailed Joseph Merrick's life, and it was, for me, a transformative. Well, I should say just formative because I was only like five or six when I saw it. My dad used to let me watch everything, and I got to watch horror movies or whatever, even at a very, very young age. And so seeing the movie The Elephant Man, which say what you will about Hollywood, while a lot of the dialogue isn't accurate, the story that they tell about Joseph Merrick's life is very, very close to what happened to him, what really was his life. There's really not much there that changed a whole lot. Names and places, but for the most part, the events that they show in that movie are all pretty close, if not completely accurate. That being said, that movie and that story, the story of Joseph Merrick's life, literally changed who I was as a person. And I'm gonna be very honest about this. I didn't really know who I was gonna quote today, and then I saw it was his birthday, and immediately I'm like rushed back. All through I'm 50 years old. I'm about to be 51. And through multiple points in my life, there have been something that reminded me of Joseph Merrick, some moment or something. And I didn't really quite understand it. I actually was just having a conversation with my girlfriend about this because it was kind of upsetting to me. Like, I really don't, I didn't really have a way of describing it, but I think that I've kind of figured it out. At a very young age, that movie horrified me. I could watch any other horror movies, Jason, didn't matter. Those weren't scary to me. Big slasher flicks weren't scary to me, but The Elephant Man terrified me. And I didn't quite understand it until I remembered a conversation. My dad wasn't much for parental wisdom, but I remember a conversation that he had with me after he saw how scared I was. Because there is the very famous scene in that movie, which did happen in real life, although the famous quote didn't happen there. Where he's basically assaulted by a group of younger men that beat the living shit out of him because he looks different, right? Because he's looks like deformed. That's what he is. The term is deformed. That's what he was. And uh, in that moment is when he says I'm not an animal, I'm a man, or whatever the quote is from the movie. That he didn't actually do that, and he's screaming it. That's not any None of that had anything to do with what scared me. What scared me was, and I remember trying to figure this out in the conversation with him, was the way that these people were just beating him up for nothing. Like, he was just trying to walk. Like, he was just walking down the street and they saw he looked different and they started to beat him up. And I remember even at that age being horrified by that. I don't I didn't quite draw the line through how that moment, seeing that scene in that movie really honestly kind of set me on a course that leads me to where I am right now, but it really truly did. And it was difficult to kind of come to terms with that. Just, I mean, literally like 3 hours ago, I'm just sitting there going, wow, I think that there's just points in my life where I remember that scene and that movie and these moments. And I haven't watched the movie in years, but I remember the just imagery of it and the way that it struck me so deeply. Now, people, for quote of the day and everything, they're like, well, it was a movie. It wasn't really him. What you don't understand about that 1980 movie starring John Hurt as Joseph Merrick, the Elephant Man, and Anthony Hopkins as, I can't remember his doctor's friend name, but he was in it as well. What you don't know about that is that for that movie, they went in and they got Joseph Merrick's skull, which is still, it's not on display. Let me make that very clear. It's still being kept in, I think, London, in one of the schools there, one of the medical schools. They still keep it, and there on display, they went and they, not again, not on display for the public, just on display for, students. They went and they measured his skull, and they did all the makeup and everything, all the prosthetics they did for John Hurt to turn into Joseph Merrick. That was all very much like very, very, very close to what it was really like for him. And that the makeup and everything was so good, and this is a little bit of trivia for you. The makeup was so good that they wanted to celebrate it, but they didn't have a category for it in the Academy Awards. And that was the first movie. That is the movie is the reason why we have the best makeup category in the Academy Awards. Something that you probably didn't know. Now, what does all this have to do with the quote? Well, there was a point in time where Joseph Merrick, not John Hurt, played Joseph Merrick, where Joseph Merrick was, uh, he was going through a period where he had kind of given himself over to being a freak in sideshows, and he would go through and they would have a guy up on the stage would be like pointing at different things on his skull and things like that, and they would talk about how he was, how deformed he was and how he was this freak, and they would say all these horrible things about him, and he would just stand there throughout the whole thing, and he would kind of pose in different poses so they could point to different things about him. This was something that happened for years of his life, and he became like a freak, right? Like a sideshow freak. He literally, that's what he became. And at the end of every one of his shows, and including in his autobiography that he wrote supposedly with his own hand, but it seems like that was probably not completely true. Um, he he would end his pamphlets and his performances by either reciting or writing this poem. Now, this poem isn't his, so technically, the quote of the day is derivative to a certain degree because the he said this all the time. This was kind of like his sign off, but he didn't write it. It's actually written by the poet Isaac Watts, but it was so moving to Joseph Merrick that he ended up adopting it and kind of making it his own. So I'm going to read you that poem. It's just a few lines, but I'm going to read you that poem, and then we're going to talk just a little bit more about Joseph Merrick. Now, again, this was a poem written by the poet Isaac Watts, but it is something that Joseph Merrick said all the time. This was how he kind of conveyed that he wasn't a beast. And I want you to imagine this. You've gone to this freak show, which is something that people used to do. They used to call him that. You go to this show, and this man that vaguely resembles a man, this man who's got all sorts of, malformations and deformities and such, that you can't even recognize his skull. It doesn't look like a human skull anymore. And he stands up on stage and he allows them to poke and prod him on stage in front of you. And it is at once somewhat grotesque, but also terrifying, but also something more. And then at the end of this man, this being that is on stage that you barely recognize as a human, turns to the audience and says this: "'Tis true, my form is something odd, but blaming me is blaming God. Could I create myself anew, I would not fail in pleasing you. If I could reach from pole to pole, or grasp the ocean with a span, I would be measured by the soul. The mind's the standard of a man." Now, I don't know about you, but that gives me chills. Joseph, we don't know what created the Elephant Man. There are lots of hypotheses, and most people lean towards him having something called Proteus, but we don't know. It hasn't been proven. But what we do know is that Joseph Merrick suffered his entire life. And if you don't know how he died by trying to sleep like a normal person, and the weight of his own head suffocated him in the middle of the night. I can't think of anything more horrifying than that. And that's why, for today, I wanted to say happy birthday to Joseph Merrick, the Elephant Man. For the rest of you, please take care of yourself and take care of others. I'll talk to you soon.